You know that feeling when you update the operating system on your phone and it takes, what, maybe 3
Right.
minutes?
Yeah. Barely any time at all.
Exactly. But then you go to work and your company takes, I mean, literally 6 months just to approve a new software tool.
Oh, absolutely.
There is this, I don't know, this dizzying sensation we all seem to be living with right now because technology, global financial markets, the sheer volume of daily information, it's all moving at absolute warp speed.
Yeah, warp speed is a good way to put it.
But the daily reality of our actual lives, our institutions, our schools, local supply chains, bureaucracies, they feel entirely stuck in the mud.
Which creates this really profound sense of whiplash. Because we are essentially living in a dual speed reality. And that discrepancy isn't just, a minor annoyance.
Right.
It's actually generating a massive amount of invisible stress across the entire structure of society.
And that invisible stress is exactly what we are getting into today. So welcome to the deep dive. We have a really fascinating stack of sources to explore for you today.
We really do.
Yeah, primarily drawn from a series of structural observation logs. So we're going to be looking at some incredibly insightful weekly reports, specifically the MGF weekly reports for weeks 24 and 25.
Right. And along with those, we have notes from a couple of theoretical models, specifically the membrane contact phase model, versions 1.1 and 1.2.
Yes, which analyze how systems handle friction. And we'll even get into a framework for how our own cognition processes all this high-speed change, which is called LMOS.
But, our mission today is a bit different from a standard overview.
Yeah, definitely.
Instead of just summarizing the latest weekly news or looking at, individual events, we're going to explore a really profound shift in how we actually observe the world right now.
Right. The goal is to move beyond just kind of sitting back and watching things speed up. We want to intellectually explore the hidden structures that are quietly and in some cases desperately keeping the world from falling apart.
Exactly. And to understand that shift, we kind of have to start by looking at the baseline observation established in the earlier logs, specifically around week 24.
Okay, let's start there.
So the primary focus back then was all about a concept they call velocity mismatch, which the reports also refer to as shear.
Shear, like wind shear in aviation.
Precisely the same mechanic, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, in meteorology, wind shear happens when two layers of air are moving at completely different speeds or in totally different directions.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The atmosphere doesn't just glide smoothly over itself. It violently tears at the boundary layer, which creates massive turbulence. And the Week 24 report observed this exact same phenomenon happening across human society.
So it's like a societal turbulence.
Exactly. Because on one hand, you have high-speed systems. So think about the overnight implementation of artificial intelligence or high-frequency global financial markets.
Right.
Or these incredibly complex, highly optimized supply chain algorithms.
And then on the other band, you have the slow speed systems, right? You have the traditional education system trying to figure out how to, I don't know, grade essays now, human performance evaluations, local neighborhood economies, basic bureaucratic institutions.
Yep. We just move slower.
So let's unpack this a bit because it's kind of like, it's like bolting a jet engine onto a horse-drawn carriage.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, because the engine wants to go Mach 2, but the wooden wheels are literally splintering. So when these two wildly different speeds clash, where does all that friction actually go? I mean, it doesn't just vanish into thin air.
No, it doesn't. And that is the pivotal question that changes everything in these reports. If you have that jet engine strapped to a wooden carriage, the friction concentrates relentlessly at the bolts.
Right, the contact points.
Exactly. It concentrates at the points of physical contact. And in the structural models we're looking at, they call these contact points membranes.
Membranes, okay.
Yeah. So the friction from the velocity mismatch creates this intense localized tension on the boundaries, the membranes, between the fast systems and the slow systems.
Which brings us to the massive shift in observation that happened in the Week 25 report.
That is a turning point, yeah.
Because in Week 25, the observers realized that looking for, massive explosions or sudden spectacular societal collapses was entirely the wrong approach.
Right. The real story wasn't a sudden explosion. The focus shifted entirely to the intermediate structures.
Okay, the intermediate structures.
Yeah, these are the specific things quietly absorbing all those velocity mismatches, just day in and day out.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because when we say intermediate structures, we're not just talking about, a customer service rep getting yelled at, right? It's much bigger than that.
Oh, much bigger. The sources define these intermediate structures as Institutions, logistics networks, organizational processes,
Wow.
even local community networks and operational rules. They act as the literal translation layers for society
Translation layers. I like that phrase.
because they have to take the Mach 2 output of that jet engine and somehow figure out a way to translate it or dilute it
Yeah.
or process it so that the wooden wheels of our daily lives don't just immediately shatter.
So they are essentially the shock absorbers.
Exactly.
Let's look at the specific real-world examples from the sources, because honestly, once you see this pattern, you notice it everywhere.
You really do.
Like, take AI adoption in a corporate setting. The technology is incredibly fast, you install it, and it boosts certain types of raw productivity almost overnight.
Sure.
But the traditional evaluation systems and responsibility frameworks, like the HR departments, the legal compliance teams, they
Right.
haven't caught up at all.
Not even close.
When,
Which means the velocity mismatch
Right.
creates a massive translation load.
right.
And who actually bears that load?
Right.
It falls squarely on the human workers and the middle managers. Imagine being a project manager right now.
Oh, man, yeah.
You are suddenly expected to process like 3 times the amount of data
Wow.
because an AI tool allows it.
Right.
But your company's approval process still requires 3 physical signatures and a 2-week review period.
Right, it's maddening.
That manager is the intermediate structure. They're the one trying to reconcile a hyper-efficient technology with a slow-moving bureaucracy. They literally have to figure out all the gray areas on the fly.
It's so true. And another brilliant example the text brings up is logistics. Because over the past decade or so, we've used these extreme optimization algorithms to slash shipping costs, right? To make supply chains incredibly efficient on paper.
Yeah, on paper being the key phrase there.
Exactly.
Because that extreme optimization stripped out all the buffer room. The warehouses are leaner, the turnaround times are way tighter.
So when a localized disruption happens, say, I don't know, a geopolitical flare-up, a storm, a port strike, there is just a severe lack of redundancy in the system.
None at all. So the logistics network itself becomes the intermediate structure. It is groaning under the pressure of having to be both hyper-fast to satisfy the algorithm and perfectly reliable in the real physical world without any extra slack built in.
It's so counterintuitive to how we normally view the world. You know, we usually only notice a bridge when it collapses into the river.
Right.
But Week 25 is basically saying, no, you need to study the bridge while it's quietly vibrating under heavy traffic. We need to look at the translation layers. But if we're studying the bridge while it vibrates, it makes me wonder, are these intermediate structures actually holding up, or are they quietly breaking without us even noticing?
Well, to answer that, we have to pull from one of the specific models in the sources, the membrane contact phase model.
Okay.
Because this model specifically looks at how systems handle that exact kind of friction and heat. And it introduces a concept that directly addresses your concern about quiet breakage.
What is it?
It describes a systemic state called chronic depolarization.
Chronic depolarization. I mean, just the phrase sounds exhausted.
It is quite literally the systemic equivalent of exhaustion. What the model points out is that systems do not always fail spectacularly.
Right. They don't just blow up.
They don't just snap in half. Instead, under constant shear, they enter this chronic state of high load, low recovery, and constant agonizing sensitivity to tiny stimuli.
Because the models look at a constant tug of war, right? On one side, you have the heat, the pure abrasive friction generated when a fast system grinds against a slow one.
Yep.
And on the other side, you have the system's recovery capacity.
That is the core dynamic. In a state of chronic depolarization, the heat is perpetually high, the recovery capacity is perpetually low, and the historical strain, meaning the accumulated damage from past friction, is steadily rising.
Wow.
So the system hasn't totally collapsed yet, but it is stuck in a state of permanent vibrating tension.
That's a terrifying image.
And the text mentions some incredibly relatable examples of this. Think about always on social media spaces where everyone is constantly outraged at the slightest provocation.
Oh, absolutely.
Or exhausted organizations,
Yeah.
where every single minor email feels like a 5-alarm crisis. That is a system in chronic depolarization.
Okay, but wait, let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because every business book I've ever read, every management seminar, it all treats efficiency as the holy grail.
No, of course.
We're explicitly taught that we're supposed to be always on, that supply chains should be perfectly synchronized to the millisecond, and that any downtime is just wasted money. Are you saying that constant reactivity is actually a sign of systemic failure?
It is a massive trap. And the sources push back on the cult of pure efficiency very hard. I mean, if
Uh-huh.
you look at Propositions 6 and 10 in the models, they lay out a fascinating, totally counterintuitive principle.
Okay, what is it?
Systems that are perfectly synchronized actually lose their long-term adaptability.
Because they have absolutely no wiggle room.
None. Zero.
Yeah.
When a system is perfectly synchronized and heavily optimized, it becomes completely rigid. It does not dissipate heat. It cannot find any time to recover. If every single second of a worker's day, or every single square inch of a shipping container, is optimized for maximum output, there is zero time or space allocated for repair.
That makes total sense.
The text calls this danger state silent calcification. The membrane hardens. And as we know from basic physics, a hard, rigid system doesn't adapt to change. It resists, it vibrates, and eventually it shatters.
So what does this all mean for how we evaluate whether a company or even a society is actually doing well? Because if pure efficiency is a trap that just leads to silent calcification, I obviously need a new way to measure success.
We do. And this is where the evaluation framework undergoes a massive expansion in the Week 25 logs.
Yeah.
For a long time, the debate was always framed as, efficiency versus resilience, as if
Right.
they were just two opposites on a single slider and you had to pick one. But the new framework argues that simply dialing back efficiency isn't enough. True systemic health now has to actively include redundancy, robust translation capability, and sustainable operation.
Which brings us to a concept in the models called liquid stability.
Yeah.
I absolutely love this concept because the argument is that true stability isn't a fixed, rigid state. It's not about locking everything down. Liquid stability is the ability to maintain local fluctuations, diversity, and what the text beautifully calls play without the whole thing collapsing.
Exactly. Liquid stability is essentially the capacity to allow for a little bit of noise, a little bit of localized inefficiency, because that fluctuation density is actually the core source of adaptability.
Right.
It means a system can take a hit, deform slightly, and bounce back.
So true health isn't a rigid, perfectly engineered glass tower that shatters the second there's an earthquake. It's a bamboo forest.
Well, that's perfect.
Right. It has fluctuation density, it sways, it bends in the wind, it has physical space between the stalks, and that allows it to absorb the shock of a storm without snapping.
The bamboo forest is the perfect visualization of liquid stability.
Mm.
It dissipates the energy of the wind specifically because it isn't rigidly synchronized.
Right.
But here's the critical part. Maintaining that bamboo forest, maintaining that liquid stability, requires something very intentional. And the source text redefines this requirement in a truly radical way. It redefines the concept of care.
Yes, this completely shifted my perspective when I read it, because when we hear the word care in a corporate or societal context, we immediately think of empathy or human emotion or just, being nice to your coworkers.
Sure.
But the source text strips the emotion out of it completely. It states that care is not an emotion. It is an infrastructure.
It is what the models call a repolarization operation.
A repolarization operation.
Yeah, in the pure mechanics of system survival, care is the active structural process of maintaining a system's ability to recover and stay fluid.
Wow.
It is the deliberate allocation of tangible resources, time, and physical space to allow a system to heal from friction.
If I can throw another analogy at this, because I feel like it really helps visualize it, if we strip the emotional baggage from the word, structural care is basically the suspension system on a mountain bike.
Oh, I like that. Right. If you ride down a rocky Mach 2 trail on a bike with a completely rigid frame, every single jolt goes straight into your spine, and eventually the metal frame cracks from the shear.
Exactly.
Care is the shock absorber. It's the mechanical travel in the suspension that lets the wheel bounce so the frame doesn't snap. So if a company wants to implement care, it's not about throwing a pizza party on a Friday.
Not at all. Structural care in an organization means building actual redundancy into the supply chain, so a single shipping delay doesn't cause a company-wide panic.
Right.
It means giving employees cognitive slack time where they aren't actively producing, so they aren't operating in a constant state of chronic depolarization. Care is literally the structural buffer that keeps the intermediate layers from calcifying.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really changes everything about how we view progress. Because a civilization's stability isn't measured by its technological growth rate or its maximum speed, it's measured by its recovery rate, its capacity to dissipate heat and maintain that liquid stability.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most crucial piece of the puzzle. Because we've talked extensively about global supply chains, AI rollouts, and massive societal structures.
Right.
But what about you, the listener? What about our own individual experience? Because reading the news right now, or just existing in the modern workplace, it feels like standing entirely unprotected in a wind tunnel of this velocity mismatch.
Yeah, because if the logistics networks and the corporations are suffering from chronic depolarization, our individual brains definitely are too.
Absolutely. And the sources address this directly in the LMOS version 2.0 framework.
Right, the LMOS framework.
You can think of it as an operating system for your own mind.
Hmm.
It's a methodology to intellectually process all this high-speed change without burning out or calcifying yourself.
And the LMOS framework identifies a very specific, very modern danger that it calls the closure gradient. So what is this gradient, and what is the pressure that's closing in on us?
Well, the closure gradient describes a phenomenon completely unique to our hyperconnected era. It's the fact that the speed at which explanations are generated vastly outpaces our human speed of digestion.
Oh, that is so true.
We are constantly bombarded with highly polished, instantaneous explanations for every complex global event, literally the second it happens.
Right. Something massive and structurally complex happens in the world at, say, 9:00 a.m., and by lunchtime there are 1,000 hot takes on your feed telling you exactly what it means, who the villain is, and who you should be mad at.
Exactly. And that speed creates an immense invisible cognitive pressure to fix your worldview immediately.
Yeah, you feel like you have to have an opinion.
Right, because the cognitive load of dealing with ambiguity, of sitting there and saying, I don't know what this means yet, is
Yeah.
incredibly high and uncomfortable. So the closure gradient pushes us to turn incredibly complex structural issues into simple deterministic friend or foe narratives.
Wow.
We lock into rigid beliefs very quickly just to alleviate the stress of not knowing.
It's like mental fast food. We have this agonizing hunger for certainty because the ambiguity of the velocity mismatch is so stressful. So we pull up to the drive-thru of whatever newsfeed we prefer, grab the greasiest, simplest us versus them explanation, and just gorge on it to make the hunger pangs stop.
That's exactly what happens.
But by doing that, we calcify. Our brains do the exact same thing the rigid supply chains do. We lose our liquid stability. We lose our cognitive play.
We do exactly that. We jump to fast synchronization. We align immediately with a simple narrative because it feels safe. It stops the vibration. But in doing so, we lose our ability to observe the nuance. We entirely lose our adaptability.
So if our brains are calcifying under this pressure, there has to be a way to release the valve. Did the LMOS framework offer any kind of mental shock absorber to fight back against this closure gradient?
It does. It advocates for two interconnected practices, cognitive cooling and open-loop preservation.
Cognitive cooling. I feel like we all need to learn how to do that immediately. How does that actually work in practice?
It's an internal, deliberate discipline. It means actively recognizing when a narrative or a situation is trying to force you into a high-speed synchronization.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say you receive an ambiguous, slightly tense message from your boss. Or you're scrolling through a highly polarizing news story that just makes your blood pressure spike.
Right.
The closure gradient urges you to instantly fire back a defensive email, or immediately adopt a rigid, angry stance on the news story just to resolve the tension.
Right, the urge to just finalize the thought and move on.
Exactly. But cognitive cooling is the act of stepping back and saying, no, I am going to intentionally leave this loop open. It is the practice of resisting the urge to jump to deterministic predictions or final absolute answers. You choose to maintain what the text calls a low-speed contact layer.
So it's being okay with the discomfort.
Yes.
It's looking at that stressful email or that massive global event and explicitly telling yourself, I don't fully understand the structural implications of this yet, and I'm going to let it sit in the gray area. I'm not going to snap to a judgment.
Exactly. You are treating your own cognition as an intermediate structure that requires care. You are building in your own shock absorbers.
I love that.
You have to allow yourself the cognitive slack to reevaluate over time, to reread the situation tomorrow, and to stay grounded without instantly snapping to a rigid conclusion. You have to actively maintain your own mental liquid stability.
That is incredibly powerful, and it really brings the entire deep dive full circle. It all connects. The hyper-optimized logistics network that snaps during a crisis because it has no redundancy, and the human mind that snaps into rigid outrage because it has no cognitive slack.
Precisely.
Both are failing to handle the velocity mismatch because they fundamentally lack the structural care infrastructure needed to absorb the friction.
And that profound realization is why the shift in week 25 is so vital for us to understand. We have to stop staring, mesmerized, at the jet engine of progress and start paying very close intentional attention to the wooden wheels, the bolts, the processes, and the people trying to hold it all together.
So bringing this back to you, the listener, the next time you feel that wave of frustration because your organization is moving at a glacial pace to adapt to a new technology, or you get angry at how fragile a local supply chain seems to be when a single shipment is delayed, realize what you are actually seeing. You aren't just seeing incompetence, you are witnessing the velocity mismatch in real time.
You are seeing the shear, you are watching the friction concentrate on the membrane.
And when you see that, I want you to observe these intermediate structures in your own life. Look for where the quiet wear is happening, both around you and inside your own head. Ask yourself the hard structural questions.
Yeah.
Is there enough redundancy here? Is there a care infrastructure actually built into my team's workflow, my family's routine, or my own mental habits to handle this friction? Are we building a rigid glass tower that demands pure efficiency, or are we cultivating a bamboo forest with the liquid stability to bend?
Because when you adopt this framework, it changes how you evaluate everything. You stop obsessing over maximum speed and perfect synchronization, and you start looking for recovery capacity.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today, stretching from the algorithms of global logistics all the way down to the operating system of your own mind. But as we promised at the start, we aren't going to tie this up with a neat, definitive bow.
No, definitely not.
We are going to practice open loop preservation right now. We are going to leave you to mull over this exact observation directly from the Week 25 report.
Perhaps the most important shift is not in the speed of change itself, but in our growing recognition that the structures absorbing that change have become worthy of observation in their own right.